So welcome to our podcast, On Wonder AAC podcast. Today, we're so excited. I'm Sarah. And
I'm Brenda Del Monte.
And we're here with two occupational therapists. And we're really excited because the topic today is mobility matters. So we'll have you introduce yourselves. Melanie, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, my name is Melanie Thompson. I'm an OT that works at private practice, predominantly out in Arizona. And I got into power mobility about 7 years ago, and it has been a game changer for me. So I'm very excited to talk about it.
Great, thanks. And Heidi.
I'm Heidi Brislin. I'm an occupational therapist. I work 1 day a week for the Special Ed Tech Center, and I work in the Edmonds School District. And in addition, I have a very small private practice where I do power mobility and kind of access evaluations. And I got started, off and on through my OT career, I've done power mobility things, but I really got started with pediatric power mobility about probably 6 or 7 years ago as well, Melanie.
Well, that's funny. You're on the same path there as far as you got started, but you have different settings. So Melanie, you said you're private, and Heidi in the schools, but you're both OTs. So tell me a little bit about what it's like to step outside your domain a little bit, getting into this power mobility, and then also just what are your thoughts generally about independent mobility? Heidi, we'll start with you.
Well, I'll answer the domain question. I think as an occupational therapist, I did adult rehab for many years before I worked in the school. So I've always done power mobility. I've always been part of like the seating team and, different things, because being able to move is just an essential occupation to be able to do all the things that you need to do for your activities of daily living. My thoughts about pediatric power mobility have definitely changed as I've started doing pediatric, because I think the framework, when you do adults, you have people who know how to move their body independently. And so you're teaching them to drive the chair from the get-go. And with children, these children we're working with really complicated bodies that don't cooperate often. That we're teaching them to move. So when I look at pediatric power mobility, I'm looking at it from a developmental progression. And so you have to kind of go back to, just the normal typical development and how do kids typically develop movement. And when you put a child in the chair and they move for the first time, you need to be thinking about, why do kids go? Why do kids stop? Why do they turn and look at things? And that you're really looking at it from a developmental perspective. And, I think I think every child deserves this opportunity, and it's supported by research. And in the schools, I work in the schools. I do most of my power mobility work in the schools, and we're tasked to provide evidence-based practice, and it is evidence-based, and it improves so many skills. Their cognition, their language, perceptual, play, social skills, you name it. So that's kind of my thoughts. It's just really, really important.
When you put it that way, it's everyone's domain, right?
Yep.
So Melanie, what about you? I know that in the world of private practice, physical therapists are the main people who are doing referrals for mobility. So how does this land with you?
It was a definite mental shift for sure, just because mobility has always been considered a PT's domain for sure. But I agree with Heidi that accessing your environment is OT. Like you being able to get to your toys, you being able to get to the kitchen or follow mom or do whatever is independent living. And that thus makes it an OT domain as well. And I agree with Brenda. In all honesty, you could fight for it to be a speech domain as well, because if I don't understand what you want, but you can drive to the fridge to tell me that you're hungry or something as that's communication. And so I feel like any form of mobility, we're talking about powered mobility today, but any mobility is a God-given right and something that every child seeks movement. And so it's something that's highly motivating, and it gives me a tremendous amount of insight into my kids, their personalities, their likes, their dislikes, that without it, I wouldn't know.
I really like what Heidi said about development. And I know, Melanie, I've heard you talk about pots and pans before, but, sometimes Melanie will put a kiddo in a chair and they just do circles. And so then there's a sidebar conversation with parents with, oh, they don't know what they're doing. I guess they're not ready yet. So speak a little bit about what does it look like the first time you put a child in a chair, and what's normal?
For me?
Yeah.
I think normal, the only thing I look for in that very first time I'm putting a kid in his chair is, do they understand that they are making it go? And I don't care if it's circles or not. Circles or not does not mean they don't understand. And again, I feel like it's I'm not the words, but again, a God-given right that we know what's behind us. We, as neurotypical people, know, and we can turn around and look and see what's behind us. And that if you are not mobile and you have never had that capability before, doing donuts and circles to scan your environment is not considered a bad thing. And so if they get stuck and will only do circles, then I'll change the game up a little bit and see if they can hit a different switch, or I'll change that switch to make it a go, or I'll do something else. But a child that just does circles learns that they hit that switch or the joystick or whatever they did, and they made it move. And that's the only thing that I need to understand, that that child understands that they had control of it.
Do you have anything to add about that, Heidi? What does it look like when, I know we work with, Melanie and I work with really young children, and you're probably working with more school age space, but what does it look like when you put a kid in a chair, and how do you know that they're making connections?
Well, honestly, I just work really hard to set them up for success. So the first time, I had a little guy with CVI, and he kind of lived down here. And so, we started off just, he lived with his, head down, and his, everything on his lap was like what he was, his whole world was there. And so we started with a proximity switch that I just held so that when he moved his head, it would move. And, you want them to be like, you did that, and give them that opportunity. And so, I think it's every time you put someone in a chair, it's like you want to start with success. I mean, you want to give them success. You want to end on a successful note. And I have a story I could tell. The first 3 kiddos I did power mobility with in the schools were all in the same school. And so we moved them. We had one loaner chair that I'd gotten, and we moved one day, did all 3 of them in the chair just to kind of see. So talk about moving and adjusting things or whatever. And so my last student had cerebral palsy, CVI, had just gotten an eye gaze device, was using that pretty well. Severe contractures. And if that little boy could move his head 15 degrees in either direction, I'm being really generous. And the team was like, you're not going to put him in that chair, are you? And I'm like, heck yeah. And we put him in the chair, and he was using 3 switch. We had all 3 on because we didn't know any better. And he, within 5 minutes, turned that chair in a circle and drove up to a friend and stopped.
That's good.
And that changed everybody's perception of that young man.
I bet it did. That is amazing for lots of things. One comes to mind, and that is the CVI, because often we don't get referrals for AAC because they have CVI, so they must not be able to see. We make some assumptions, and if you know much about CVI, it's a really broad diagnosis. It's fluctuating. It improves with age, and I'm talking about from 0 to age 8, it improves a lot, just like all vision. So it's like, you think, well, why would we put someone who can't really see in a powered chair? And it's like, well, blind people actually still walk, right? So that's part of it. The other part of it is that they're not blind, and that CVI lets us know a lot about vision. And I know Melanie has seen that a lot of times too. Like parents will say, I don't think they can see, and then they drive up and stop. So I think that Melanie I know she probably has a lot of stories, but I want to talk about how young is too young, Melanie?
Well, I think that putting them in a chair, just to touch on that for a second, also gives me insight into what they see. How far can they see? How large of objects can they see? And so that is not a pitfall. Vision is, I mean, obviously it's required to know where you are, but it is, I would still put a kid in a chair to give them that opportunity to see what they can do. I put kids in chairs as young as 12 months. And that is because kids should start walking around 12 months, right? And so my kids have already missed out on learning opportunities, not because they are not capable or cognitively capable of learning, but because they don't move to get to the same kinds of opportunities to learn. Right. And so, as Brenda touched on, my spiel to my parents is that, your your infant can crawl around 6 to 9 months, and they crawl over to the kitchen cabinet and they pull out the pots and pans and they hear how they clink together and they see how they stack together. And they are making all kinds of connections and learning opportunities in that moment. That did not happen because we keep our kids strapped in a high chair and mom and dad thought, you know what, let's bring out some pots and pans and have them play. That's not how childhood development works. And so, and this kind of goes inside with the research behind what we talked about earlier, as far as giving kids the opportunity, is that, if you think about typical childhood development, they get up on their hands and knees and they start rocking and they rock too far and, oop, I caught myself, that protective reaction. That was cool. Maybe I can do that again. And they take another one, right? And we don't then go to the other side of the house and say, come here, Johnny, and expect them to crawl the whole way. So we have to give them the opportunity to learn how to move. And I think that's what's very different via pediatrics and adults.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions that we were thinking about asking you too was about, how does independent mobility relate to AAC communication? But I mean, we just keep hearing it in everything you're saying, right? Right from the beginning, you gave an example that you're going to go see what's in the fridge, go see what you want, go explore your environment, and then that invites communication too, right? If you're looking at something, a parent is likely to say, oh, you found a book about whatever, let's look at it and read it. Is there anything else you want to add about that, Heidi?
Well, and I think, with the power chair, you just have to, you set up opportunities. So, we've done things like cut up books and paste the page, laminate and paste the pages along the wall so that they have a reason to stop. Like, we're going to stop and read the next page of the book, or and sometimes just let them. I had one gal who loved to smell flowers, and she'd drive into the middle of this blooming bush every time. She'd stop when she got there, but she just wanted to smell the flowers. So, I think the thing to know about these power chairs, especially for kids who are going to use some type of alternative access, meaning like, a head array, a fiber optic switch, something besides a joystick, is that chair for that child is mission control. It gives them access to everything they could ever possibly want to do. And that's, and AAC is, so crucial, because often, like with using the proximity switches for the powered chair, you see their access skills really grow and develop, and it makes using the AAC system so much easier, because that motor pathway, is getting a lot of practice in that powered chair. So, it's a life changer.
Yeah, I know that we've been on consults together, Heidi, and the team is problem solving ideas for communication, think about high-tech AAC, and then you're hearing they're also getting a new chair And there's all these things that come to mind, right? Your brain goes, oh, well, XYZ, because there's so many things to think about, right? Like you said, it's the central.
Well, and going back to like it being everybody's domain, I really try in the school district, if we're doing an evaluation and we're writing the letter of medical necessity, that everybody is signing that letter. Every part of the team is, because we're talking about, we need, this type of head array, and we need this switch interface so they can talk to their AAC device, and we need a mount for the chair. And so it's really not just, just PT or just OT, or it really takes that whole village. And you've got to look at what are the expectations at school and home, so that when you're looking at that chair, when you're building that chair, you're making sure that it's going to meet the students' needs in all of their environments. And so often I would have students go to like, one of the big medical centers that does wheelchair evals, and they'd come back with something, and I'd be like, this isn't going to work at school. And so I really think schools where they spend most of their awake hours during the first 15 years of their life. So I think we need to make sure that we're at the table helping make those decisions.
Melanie, I'm sure you have something to add to that.
So much to say. I have to piggyback on what Heidi said, in that powered mobility changes the trajectory of our kids. I've always said, well, not always, since the past 7 years, that it's my mission to get my kids with complicated bodies walking and talking, no matter what that looks like, because it does change the trajectory. Our kids with complicated bodies, unfortunately, get lowballed a lot by society, even by well-intended teachers and aides and therapists and so forth. And if I say, Johnny, do you want to play with Elmo or Cookie Monster? And, typical Tommy turns around and runs away. Our assumption is that he didn't want to play with either of those. But a kiddo in a complicated body, if I say Cookie Monster or Elmo, and they don't respond, it's like, oh, they didn't understand. Mm-hmm. My kids, if they drive to something, oh, I didn't know that's what you wanted. Again, thank you for telling me. And it gives me such great insight into their world. And the kiddo in school that can drive to their classroom door when it's time to go to music class, you're a smart cookie. We better teach you your A, B's, and C's and other skills, because you've already demonstrated that you have really good problem solving skills. So I just think it's looking at the whole picture, the whole body, because they all are intertwined. OT, PT, speech, teacher, aid, everything, it is intertwined in this. I initially got into powered mobility because of AAC. So I am an evaluator for AAC in Arizona. And I had a dear friend convince me to go to this class at ASL in Texas. And if you guys haven't heard of this, I highly recommend that everyone go to this class. It is a free continuing ed class. All you have to do is get to Texas. They'll pay for your hotel and training and food. You just need to actually get there.
And ASL stands for
Adaptive Switch Lab. So, and I went to the class because the premise was that they're going to teach you about how to interface your wheelchair, whether it's a sip and puff or head switches or joystick or whatever, how to access iPads and AAC devices and other ECUs and so forth. And I'm like, oh, as an AAC evaluator, I should know these things. And I remember sitting in this class. By the way, I've gone multiple times. It's so worth it. And I remember sitting in this class the very first day, and they were talking about seating and positioning. And then they were showing all these videos of highly complicated kids driving these power chairs. And I'm going to put myself out there. I had never even considered power mobility for any of my kids. I didn't think they can do it. I didn't know enough about it to think that they could do it. And so I'm like, wow, I wonder if my kids could. And so we arranged for a time, and Arlene from ASL came out, and we picked 6 of our most complicated kids. And guess what? All 6 of them did it. All 6 of them. I have a video of a kiddo driving down with one switch to go take a walk with his grandpa, and they were taking a walk on the sidewalk together. And whether it was big or little, they all demonstrated that they understood that they were doing it. And so, wow, I undershot my kids. So I think that powered mobility plays a big part within life and AAC.
That's
So,
powerful, Melanie.
I was that friend, and I was I think the only SLP at ASL that year.
Yes, you were.
But I do want to plug it for SLPs because you have, we as SLPs we have zero training on seating and positioning. And the way that you put someone in a seat and you help position their bodies 100% affects how they can control their head. And if they have the ability to the way they control their arms. And guess what? Most access is through their head, their eyes, or their hands. And so seating and positioning is 100% related to AAC. And so I don't think it's taught. I don't think it's taught at all. And and even those of us in AAC are trial and error, but definitely we haven't had formal instruction on that. So that was the most monumental change for me in helping kids access AAC, is understanding seating and positioning. But Melanie and I do an evaluation and we get the seating and positioning down, and then they have head control now. And so they can do eye gaze or they do switches, or they, whatever they can do. And then it comes down to, but your chair doesn't work because it's a stroller and it doesn't hold an eye gaze device. And the other thing I just want to say is that the mobility matters because those sturdier mobile chairs can hold our AAC devices that are but big and bulky, because the eye gaze requires that size, right? So one thing that Melanie is just invaluable with is making sure that we get the right mounting equipment so that they can go on a chair, so that they're independent in their mobility and their AAC at their school. And, but that kind of leads us into, how did we go from, oh, let's go to this conference and learn about seating and positioning, to like these total systems. And both Melanie and Heidi are on this podcast today because they were trailblazers in their state. So Melanie, since you've already started the story, let's have you finish kind of how that ASL Advocacy conference led to all the things. And then Heidi, we can't wait to hear about yours.
Yeah. Well, and one quick thought too is that powered mobility is motivating. So when you're talking about AAC devices, I hate to say this to speech therapists, but sometimes they don't want to talk that much, but I guarantee they want to move. If you've watched any toddler ever, the family is exhausted because they're always chasing them because they're always moving. So it is really easy to put the kid in a chair and find a access method because they are highly motivated to do that. And if they can access it to drive a power chair, guess what? They can do the same thing to do the AAC device. So I feel like that was important to add in there. But
definitely.
After ASL, I went to the conference. I may have even gone twice. And I came back and realized there was a major disconnect here in Arizona about the process of how to get kids in power chairs. And I understand that there's different processes in different states and so forth, but here you have to pass a test. You have to basically do a driver's test, just like you do at age 16, and prove that you are capable of safely operating this and following directions and navigating around equipment and so on and so forth. But what's not fair is I have these complicated kids and I think they can do it, but they have not had the experience. They've never had the opportunity. So the disconnect that we found is that if I even made a referral or a recommendation that Johnny could do it, is that I have nothing to do with the evaluation process, is that they would then have to go to the PT evaluators. And unless I knew that he needs it at this speed with this control and all of these things, they're going to put him in a chair with a joystick, which most of my kids can't do, and they're going to fail the test. And again, it is not testing them on their abilities, you're testing them on lack of experience. And so there was a major disconnect that the referring PTs and OTs never actually met or knew the evaluating PTs. And so what we did is we again had ASL come to us out in Arizona, and they had a conference out here. It was a one-day let's throw everything at them. And then I'm going to say Brenda was a little bit sneaky in the aspect of what we did is we contacted the evaluating agencies that do for power chairs. And we told them about this free training opportunity for their therapists, and that they should come, what a great networking opportunity and so forth. So even though that the PTs I happen to know did not want to come to this conference because they felt like they already knew it, they came, which created a major dialogue and shift because now everybody has the same information. Everybody's on the same playing field. And the referring therapist now knows and has a connection to the evaluating therapist. And so that one conference, I'm not going to say that's all that we had to do, but that one is definitely where things started to shift here within Arizona. And so that was the beginning. And then it turned into, I was able to get some loaner chairs or chairs donated. And so I then developed basically driver's ed for these kiddos. So these kiddos can come to me and we do driver's ed and they can drive to anything they want. I don't care because I can make anything therapeutic. And we play with it, and then we get out and we get in the chair and they drive to whatever they want. And we play with it and we keep it on a more developmental model. But I, in essence, give them the skills that I know that those evaluators are looking for so that they can then pass the test.
Way more fun than your typical driver's ed, I'm sure.
Yes.
We'd all really like to see that. Thank you, Melanie.
Yeah, it's been such a fun ride. And I remember that one day, and I remember literally saying, referring PT, meet evaluating PT, and we were nobodies, you guys, like no one even knew who we were. And we even did it through our nonprofit because nobody was paying for this, So, but it was just like, we weren't, I'm a speech pathologist. And Melanie's an occupational therapist, so we weren't even part of the picture. But it kind of made us neutral in some ways because we weren't PTs. But yeah, that was huge. So Heidi, I know that Adaptive Switch Lab definitely played a role. By the way, just a side note, we went back with those evaluating SLPs. Evaluating physical therapists in the state of Arizona to Adaptive Switch Lab. We already knew the information, but we went with them just to build rapport, just to build relationships. But Heidi, tell us about your journey.
So my journey started several years ago at Closing the Gap, and I went to a class that Karen Kangas, who's an amazing occupational therapist who does a lot of power mobility and access work with her students and clients. And I always go to Closing the Gap with a couple students, 2 or 3 students in mind. And I had just gotten a student, 18-year-old, no access, no mobility, no communication. And so as I'm sitting in this pre-conference with Karen, I'm getting like all these gazillion ideas of things that I can go back and do. And so I am chatting with her, and then she connects me with the folks from Adaptive Switch Labs. And so they worked with me. We got a loaner chair. And then I hadn't even gone to the class. I had just done this pre-conference with the 2 of them, and as many classes as I could take in that, from them while I was at Closing the Gap. And so we got like an adult size loaner for my high schooler, and we got a smaller loaner for my 3 elementary students, and just kind of dove in there, just knowing what I learned from the class and trying things, and reaching out to the team from Adaptive Switch Labs, who are amazing and want to help you. And eventually they had been working on trying to come out and help me because we had so many children. We were trying to do it once. And so they came out. They also did a class while they were out here, and it was a mixture of school therapists and people from all sorts of, from adults to pediatrics around in Western Washington. And so we did that class, and I brought a whole team, my whole posse. And because really everybody on my school team said drank the Kool-Aid. And so, when they came out to help us with these evaluations, we had a team of 10 people there. And so from there, I just continued to develop skills. And then I talked my PT partner into going down to Texas to Adaptive Switch Labs for a class. And I can tell you, it's the best seating training I have ever had in my life. Every time I sit there and listen to the seating training, I learn more things. And when we were driving back to the airport, I'm like, well, we just got a denial on this one chair. And we had to take video of her doing like a driving test, which is not required in Washington State. And so we had to prove that she could go through a door, pull up to a table and stop and avoid obstacles. And so I was like, this shouldn't be how it is, because when you looked at the Washington State law, it said that they needed to, there's 3 little bullet points. So bullet point 1 was they had to be able to independently and safely operate the chair, which is crazy for kids. Kids don't independently and safely operate their body if they are on their feet most of the time. So, but then you got to like B and C, and it was the only way for them to move independently. It was age appropriate mobility, but we could never get past A. And so my PT partner, her name is Cheryl Davis, and she's just another real trailblazer in the power mobility world. So she contacted her PT lobbyist, and the 2 of us went down to the Healthcare Administration in Olympia, and we met with the director of Medicaid and basically said, hey, this is what the research says. This is what's happening. This is not appropriate for children. And she was like, nobody's ever brought that to our attention. We need to work on modifying that Washington Administrative Code. And about a year later, the WAC was changed to where now people under 21 qualify for a power chair if it is medically necessary and non-experimental. And there is another little piece of language. Yeah, it was like one of my biggest accomplishments. So
that is
really proud of the work that Cheryl and I did. And then there is another little caveat in the Washington Administrative Code where if their power chair cannot be transported in their family vehicle and it's so far from school or whatever, they can also get a backup. They can also have a manual chair, so they will pay for 2 chairs.
wow.
So it's finding the right ATP, but in Washington, definitely getting that law changed has made a huge difference. I do want to say how I find an assistive tech professional is someone, the person who works for the wheelchair supplier companies. Multiple people are assistive tech professionals. Melanie is one, but the person who is helping you order your chair and build your chair is an assistive tech professional. And I just started bringing them in and interviewing them.
Wow.
And,
So yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, so my thing was I was like, I live in a rural area. Can you provide excellent customer service to my students and their families? If something breaks down, are you going to be able to come to them to take care of that? When we build a chair, how long is it going to take for the quote to come back? And so that's kind of how I started finding people to work with. And then the parents really choose who you work with. And so I usually say, these are the choices. This is the experience I've had with them, and let them kind of choose. But I just interview them. And some have been very honest. It's like, I don't have the staffing to do that for you right now. But I have a great ATP I work with now. So,
well, I don't know. I don't want to get in the weeds here, but I'm really interested in the verbiage around the backup manual chair, because here in Arizona, you have to have a manual chair first, because once you get a power chair, you don't qualify for a manual chair. And the reality is those power chairs are expensive and they don't work in every vehicle. And there are limitations to the power chair. And Science Camp is not as, power chair adaptable as a beach chair stroller or whatever. So the right to power and manual mobility is is something that is kind of not a standard. So I'm interested in that because
Yeah.
we've run across some issues there. Did you change a law there, or are you just working on the rights, or what? Tell us about that.
Brenda,
So-
before Heidi answers, I just have to say, for those who are just listening to the audio part of this later, when Heidi mentioned the backup chair, Melanie and Brenda's jaws dropped. So, we know this is something important.
And when Heidi said we changed the law, we were all visually clapping. But
Yeah.
yes, so there's that too.
Do tell
I
us, Heidi.
believe it was part of the whole change in the WAC. So so there was some stuff there was criteria on what you could do to get a second chair. Like there were very few people that qualified
Right.
For a second chair. It was extended a little bit. And so it kind of, I think if you can fit those kids in that category, most of them. I also in my letters talk about, this is a child and, my typically developing child, I'm going to, especially to get like an attendant control, which lets the parent drive the chair, which insurances don't like to pay for. But I talk about how like with a typically developing child, there are times when you let them go independently and walk and move. There are times you're holding their hand. There are times they might be in a stroller. There are times they might be in the grocery cart. And that children with disabilities deserve all our, I don't know, deserve is probably not the word I use. I probably use something much stronger, but it's not coming to me. Deserve those same opportunities. And the parents deserve to be able to have choices in mobility for their children.
And WAC stands for what?
Washington Administrative Code.
Okay.
So it's the laws in Washington that
so
govern.
Every state has their own administrative codes. And so it's important that people know that people can dive into that. That should be publicly accessible, and to find out kind of what is the verbiage. And that's how you can better write justification letters, as if you know what the verbiage is. And if the verbiage is wrong, Heidi is proof that then work on changing the verbiage. I mean, if it takes a year, right? And I always say this about AAC, if it takes 6 months or if it takes 2 years, it's still worth it. At the end, they're communicating. If it takes a year to change a law, at the end, think about the end of a year, people getting access to mobility, that's worth the fight. I think we are instant gratification, right? We want things changed quickly. And the government doesn't work that way. And they don't have our sense of urgency. So, but that fight is worth it. And I'm really excited about all of that and super.
Well, and I can tell you, it really wasn't even a fight. Cheryl and I walked out of that meeting with the lobbyist and I'm like, I think we just changed the WAC. I think we just changed the law.
Because
and
I think the law was written for adults.
Yes, it totally was.
Yeah.
And when we talked to her, she was just like, this totally makes sense. And it was like, no one has brought this up before. And so for years, we've not been giving children access because nobody thought to bring it up. And so Cheryl and I were able to kind of read and make comments. There's a public comment time for any of the changes in the law. And we were able to read and make comments and it ended up coming out like we were just, looking at changing a few things, like age appropriate mobility and not independent and safe. And then when it got changed to medically necessary and non-experimental, I think both of our jaws dropped. But, I'd say if you're living somewhere and that's a barrier, go try to, work with your lobbyist and get a meeting with someone at Medicare or Medicaid, sorry, and just ask the question, explain what normal development is, explain what the research says, and just ask, the question, because maybe your state, no one has said anything about it. You've just done it because that's been the practice for the state.
Mm-hmm.
So Heidi, I have to give you kudos because you've opened the door for so many more kids. That is just beautiful and glorious. And it's interesting because of the fighting that I've had to do. Most of the times it has been fighting, dare I say, with other therapists. And I think old school mentality. So my youngest that has gotten approved for a wheelchair was 15 months. And again, I think that's glorious because that means we're not waiting till they're 5 or 10 to start introducing mobility, and it got approved. But the evaluating PT really fought me on it and was not willing to do the peer-to-peer with the doctor and other things. And her rationale was, well, what if she drives into the street and doesn't look for cars? And my thing is that is actually a taught skill. We hold our kids' hands and we teach them to look left and look right before we cross the street. And we do that honestly for years before we ever trust our kids to cross the street safely by themselves. And so again, I don't feel like our kids have to be held to a higher standard than what should be age appropriate. So they're not going to learn those skills unless they are moving, because little kiddo in a wheelchair or stroller that mom pushes, they're not looking left and looking right because they don't have to. So I think that mobility provides that opportunity for them to even know that they have control over this, or that there are consequences. And again, that just explodes communication and cognition.
Yeah. And, can you guys talk about buy-in at schools? Because what we have found down here is sometimes kids get a chair, they get to school, and the school has turned off the power because they don't want them to hit anybody. Right. Or they don't want them to hurt anybody. So, and I mean, I'm not advocating for anyone to get hurt here, but what has been some successful ways of presenting powered mobility in elementary schools in particular, I think, where, so that there's a more buy-in and less just turn off the chair so everyone stays safe mentality. Melanie?
I think that you have to break it down and make it achievable for the team, because I think it's overwhelming to think that little Johnny, who's 5 and in this power chair with all these other kindergartners, and isn't safe and needs all that attention in order for him to be able to drive. I break it down to, I don't need Johnny to have his chair on 24/7. But if you can give me at circle time, when it's ready to line up at the door, can you take the 5 minutes that takes in order, or have the aide or teacher or something help with that one thing? Can they be the line leader when it's time to go to music class or whatever? Can we do just little increments throughout the day? And I try to break it down in the theory of, if we're trying to make gains, neurological changes and independence and learning skills, if I go to the gym 1 hour a week, which is what they would get with me for therapy, the gains you're going to make are minimal. You're not going to see any change. If you can get 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week at school, you're going to see much bigger gains. So I think instead of saying, okay, they have to have their chair on all the time, we break it down to, here's the times that they can have control and the teacher or aide can be with them to make sure that everyone stays safe.
So
And
Melanie,
they got to know the kill switch.
Yes.
right.
There's always a kill switch. There's always
a kill switch.
So I'm thinking.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Melanie. Finish your thought.
Well, because I think that the teachers, I say this because I have a lot of OT students. And so I've seen it 100 times in the fact that they want to stop the chair when you're still 6 feet away from what they're supposed to get to, because they are nervous, not because the kid is incapable, but because they're nervous that they're going to run into something. But functional driving does mean you can get up to the table and stop. So we have to learn how to do those small increments. And if you think again about typical development, those toddlers hit their head on the kitchen counters and they run into walls and they do all kinds of things. They run into things. So it's not fair to expect that our kids will not run into things. We have to minimize the damage. So if they're going to run into a chair that I know is going to scoot, let them run into the chair. If they're going to run over a child, obviously you hit the kill switch. But you have to at least give them the opportunity, or they're never going to learn where they are in space and how to get around the child.
Right.
Right.
Well, I'm thinking of this in a similar way. We're thinking they have the chair at school. How are they going to use it? I was thinking before Brenda mentioned, for those of us who are on a team at school maybe and thinking, okay, this has made me think about a student who I think should have powered mobility now. What are my next steps? But Melanie, like you said, thinking about, well, hey, what are some opportunities that powered mobility could provide during their day? The 10 minutes during circle time each time. The inclusion of this, the piece, and the student's line leader, the student has independence. So I see it working for buy-in in that sense too. Heidi, did you
Well,
have something to add?
yeah, and the schools power mobility is exciting in the schools. Like if the team is kind of involved in that beginning thing. And so really what I spent a lot of time doing is, training the team, especially in this one classroom, because they had 3 kids. And so we had pictures of like where everything needed to be adjusted for them. And I'm like, if you can I always tell people, try not to do more than 15 minutes at a time, because cognitively it's a lot of work to drive that chair. And which means they'll do about 30 because it's hard to stop at 15. And so I would make sure that like the team at the school would get trained for how to operate the chair. And that included their paraeducators. And those 3 kids got in that chair nearly every day for the rest of the school year. They would take them out to, someone would get a turn at recess with their class, and in playing Foursquare, and they would just find times during the day. And then in addition to that, there would be, if they were working with the OT or the PT, they might do some specific kind of training as they were developing skills on, going through a doorway or different things. And, and so I think it's empowering your team, having them know where that kill switch is, that, you're going to be able to stop the chair. Here's 3 different places you can stop it. I think it's just really, if it's like, oh, we're just going to do it when Heidi comes, that doesn't work so well. And so I would go the first several times they would drive. And then it would be like, okay, it's I want to see you do it. And then just really give them the skills and the confidence to feel comfortable doing that, knowing that you're like a text away, and, then I think you can get that buy-in.
So what if, you have a small team, or, let's be real, right now, there's a lot of changing pieces. Teams, have changed since spring, or even maybe part of this year, right? And that can be really hard. Do you guys have any advice for someone who, regardless of their role, is sitting there right now thinking, I want to do this. I've never done this before. I don't even really know exactly what it means, but what do I do?
I think there's so many resources within every environment you can. You have your ATPs, and the wheelchair vendors want the kids to use their chairs, and they will be available to help. Not necessarily teach them how to drive, but they will be available if the chair got stuck and I don't know how to help, and they can be on call. The reps for the different vendors for the wheelchairs, also, they want to sell their products, guys, which means they're going to be willing to work with therapists and provide loaners to kids, to teachers or school-based and so forth. Because if they provide that and the kid can do it, guess what? That's more sales for them too. So they're highly motivated to work with teams. So even if you don't have the resources, I feel like there's always people available if you can network and find those people that will help you build this. It does take work. It's a learning curve to it, but it's highly doable. And the minute that you see your kids moving for the first time, it is worth every cent of time that you put into it, because there's nothing more magical than watching them move for the first time.
Yeah. Well, and the one thing I want to say is that, if you're lucky with your vendor, you have an ATP who might be a therapist, who might be an OT or a PT, but most ATPs are not. And kind of one of the things that I've run into is they're like, oh, you can't get that on the chair, or that won't work on the chair, you can't get this. And so, if there's something you think your child needs, and you've kind of collaborated with, the vendor, I know I'm more than happy to kind of help problem solve if you're in Washington or really any state, I had a lot of people help me, so I've got a lot of paying forward to do. And I'm happy to help, but it's like, if you decided that this is what you think your child needs to be successful in their chair, and your ATP is like, no, you need to be, you're the therapist, you're the clinician, you know more about seating and positioning. You have more background in education in that than the ATP does. So stand up for what you think that child needs.
Yeah.
Right. Good message. Hearing a lot of that, advocating for these students.
So one thing we're asking everyone as we begin to wrap up is at the end is just what do you if you heard nothing today, if all of this just elicited a lot of yeah buts, yeah but this, yeah but that, what do you want people to know about what mobility means for students with physical disabilities?
I think movement is motivating. Period. Mic drop. The kids want to do it. And because they want to do it, they're going to give you the best motor ability that they have because they want to do it. And because they want to do it, it's student led and directed. And I, as a therapist, gain so much insight into my kid by what they drive to, who they love the most, where they want to go. And that is invaluable to me. And a child with a complicated body, any insight I have into their world and their lives is worth it. And so I think mobility is motivating, and that's my key.
Yeah. Heidi?
I think one of the things I totally agree with Melanie. But I want to say, like, starting out in the schools, it can feel like daunting and big and overwhelming. And I want you to know that you're not alone. There are a lot of people out there who want to help you, either because they're going to profit from helping you, or they genuinely, which is fine. The vendors should make, money for their products, but there are people who, like, genuinely from the bottom of their heart want to help you and want to see more kids get mobility. So find your village, and find your village at school, find your village in, the therapy community or the power mobility community. And you don't have to be alone. There are people who want to help you.
That's great advice. Yeah. And if you are in Washington State and you want some support, Heidi Brislin supports us through consultation with our Special Education Technology Center consultations. So that's another way to get in touch with Heidi and to get some support. Before we wrap up, I just have to mention that I heard Melanie was nominated for an award, and would you mind just telling us about that, Melanie?
I am highly honored that I just found out this past month that I won the Impact Award from the National Board of OTs to recognize, there were 4 winners, so to recognize the impact that I have made to my clients and within our community. So there was a lot of behind the scenes people sending in things to nominate me, which I was completely unaware of, but it has been incredibly humbling and exciting, and I can't even fathom, like, it's just amazing. So I won.
Congratulations. We can see why. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I know. I love that there's some recognition here because she really is kind of the only one in Arizona that's giving kids driver's ed. And it's paying off. Lots and lots of kids are getting, I think she figured maybe over 100 chairs that she's helped kids get so far. So there's a lot, she's done a lot for the community here in Arizona. So I'm so glad of that recognition. And we are just so thankful for both of you. We know that you have huge caseloads and students working under you, and emails and calls and voicemails unresponded to, and you took the hour out today. So we really appreciate you guys coming on and talking. And I think what's important is what you both continue to say, which is that that kids deserve the mobility, and the movement is motivating, and putting those together, we can learn a lot about our kids. And there's some kids that, because of their complex bodies and maybe even lack of facial expression, we don't know what their currency is. And we don't know what they'll work hard for. And till you see them drive straight to, we had a boy that drove straight to the poster of a girl on the poster. And we were like, okay, All right. And he, by the way, he was a teenager, so everything about that was super age appropriate. And other kids will drive to the swing every time, and we realize, wow, that you need to get out of your chair and in a vestibular situation, on a daily basis, or it's a sensory diet around that, because you're showing us that, right? And then, by the way, let's put that on the AAC device, because we didn't know how much you liked that till we saw it through the motor. So they all go together, and there definitely are going to be people that are like, I thought it's an AAC podcast and we didn't even talk about that. But actually it all goes together, because it's all one body, right? And we all communicate through movement.
Yeah. And like you said, you both said, it's changing perspectives of these students and seeing all that's there and all the potential. And our chat is blowing up with congratulations for Melanie and your award, and appreciation for Heidi changing the WAC and being an advocate. So
yeah,
pretty exciting. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.